I didn't expect him to thank me, but I never thought I'd hear this. "She smells like old people." He said it so casually, as if I wasn't 2 rooms away, folding laundry with the door half open. My daughter laughed softly, not cruelly, but the way people laugh when they don't want to cause trouble. And just like that, a part of me went quiet. I didn't storm into the kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. I finished folding the towels I bought for their wedding, stacked them neatly in the linen closet, and walked upstairs to my study. There, in the bottom drawer, sat the contract they never asked about. 2 years ago, when his startup was drowning in debt, I funded it. Quietly, completely. It wasn't much to me, but it was everything to them. I never told him because it wasn't about credit. It was about giving them a chance to build something of their own. But standing there, the faint smell of fresh laundry still on my hands, I realised something painful. You can't protect people who've already decided you're invisible. I opened the folder, scanning the legal terms I once trusted. Silent partner, the papers said. And how silent I had been. But silence doesn't earn you respect. To them, I was just an old woman who smelled like forgotten years. I closed the folder and placed it gently back in the drawer, the house filled with their laughter downstairs, bright, young, alive. I sat down at my desk, my back straight, my hands steady. They thought they were running this life alone. They had no idea who had been holding the safety net all along, but maybe it was time to let them find out what falling feels like. I stared out the window at the setting sun, quiet and golden, and whispered to no one in particular. "I built your foundation. Now let's see what you build without me." The next morning felt colder, even though the sun poured through the kitchen windows the same way it always had. I made their coffee like I always did. 2 sugars for him, almond milk for her, just like every morning. They came downstairs laughing about something on his phone. They didn't even notice the mugs waiting for them, and somehow that hurt more than the words from the night before. "Thanks, babe," he said to my daughter as she handed him the coffee I had just poured. She smiled, not at me. I told myself it didn't matter, that this is how life works. Parents fade into the background so their children can shine, but still. As I wiped down the counter, I caught my reflection in the glass window, and for the first time, I didn't recognise the woman staring back. Was I really just the babysitter now? The cook? The warm body filling the empty space until they didn't need me anymore? I thought back to all the nights I stayed late with their colicky baby, the late mortgage payments I covered when his business almost folded. None of that seemed to fit in this kitchen anymore. I used to be part of the team. Now, I was the help. The realisation settled in my chest like a quiet ache. They weren't cruel people. But comfort makes people blind. And they had grown comfortable, assuming I would always be here. Always be quiet, always be grateful for whatever crumbs of affection they tossed my way. I folded the dish towel and hung it neatly on the oven handle. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their laughter. Upstairs, in my study, the folder waited, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Because some wounds need time to decide whether they scar or heal. And I wasn't sure which one this was going to be. I sat down at my desk, the morning light creeping across the hardwood floor. The folder waited for me, silent and steady, like it always had. With a sigh, I opened it, fingers brushing over the worn paper, and before I could stop it, my mind drifted backward. It was raining that afternoon, the soft kind of rain that makes the whole world feel smaller. He sat across from me at this very desk, shoulders tense, hands twisting the sleeve of his worn-out jacket. "I just need a little help to get us through this quarter," he said, voice low but desperate. "If this launch doesn't work, we could lose everything." I didn't hesitate. Not because I didn't understand the risk, but because I believed in him. And more than that, I believed in them. I slid the folder across the desk, pen resting on top. "This isn't a loan," I told him gently. "It's an investment. For your future. For my grandchildren's security." He smiled then, boyish and grateful, the way he used to when he first joined our family. "Thank you, Mum," he whispered. "I won't forget this." But people forget. Time makes promises fade. The sound of laughter drifted up from the kitchen again, sharp and distant, and suddenly that rainy afternoon felt like a story I told myself to feel needed. I closed the folder quietly, as if shutting the door on a version of me that used to believe giving enough would make me indispensable. Maybe kindness wasn't the legacy I thought it was. Maybe it was just the reason they stopped seeing me. I placed the folder back in its drawer and rested my hands on the worn oak surface. I wasn't ready to undo what I built, not yet. But for the first time, I wondered if keeping them safe meant losing myself. That afternoon, I slipped out of the house without a word. The autumn breeze brushed against my face, cool and steady, as if inviting me to breathe deeper than I had in weeks. I found myself at the little park down the street, the same one where I used to push my daughter on the swings, long before life became complicated, and there, on the worn wooden bench beneath the oak tree, sat Mrs. Collins. She looked up from her knitting, her smile soft but sharp as ever. "Haven't seen you walk this way in a while," she said, scooting over to make room. I sat beside her, letting the quiet settle between us before saying, "They called me the babysitter." Mrs. Collins didn't flinch. She never did. She let the words hang in the air, tangled between the wind and falling leaves. "I guess that makes me the cranky old neighbour then," she said with a chuckle. But her eyes stayed serious. I gave a weak smile, but it didn't reach my heart. I gave them everything, helped build their life, and somehow I became invisible in it. She rested her knitting on her lap, looking out over the empty swings. "Nora, you gave them everything but boundaries." Her words landed softly, but they hit hard. "You taught them how to depend on your love, but not how to respect it." I looked away, ashamed by how true it felt. "I didn't want to control them," I whispered. "I just wanted them to feel safe. Safe's no good if it makes them blind to the hands that built the shelter." For a while, neither of us spoke. The wind carried the laughter of some distant children, free and unaware. Mrs. Collins finally gathered her yarn and stood, offering me a gentle smile. "Maybe it's time to stop holding the walls up for them. Let's see if they learn to build on their own." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me with nothing but the wind and my thoughts. I sat there a while longer, feeling both lighter and lonelier than before, because deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. When I returned home, the house was filled with the smell of dinner simmering on the stove and the faint hum of casual conversation. For a moment, it felt almost normal, until I heard his voice from the dining room, low, confident, certain. "If we sell before the next quarter, we'll make enough to start fresh. New investors, new partners, no need to hold on to old arrangements." Old arrangements. That's what I was now. I paused in the hallway, out of sight, but unable to move. "Do you think your mum will mind?" my daughter asked, her voice quieter but not hesitant. He laughed. "She won't even notice. She's just happy we're stable now." Stable. A word I gave them. A word they now wore, like a crown they thought they built themselves. I closed my eyes, steadying the storm rising in my chest. I could have walked in, slammed the folder down on the table, and reminded them exactly who wrote their stability into existence. But what would that have changed? Respect demanded cannot last. I stepped back from the doorway, unnoticed, my presence as invisible to them as my funding had become. Upstairs, in my study, the folder waited, silent, patient, just like me. I sat at my desk, running my fingers along its edges. Part of me still wanted to protect them, but another part, quieter, older, wiser, whispered that protecting them from the truth was no longer love. It was enabling. They had forgotten how they got here, and maybe it was time they remembered. I closed the folder and set it aside, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Because if they couldn't see the hands that built their foundation, perhaps they needed to feel what it was like when those hands let go. Later that night, when the house fell quiet and the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, he sat alone at the kitchen table. The numbers from the latest investor pitch flickered across his laptop screen, but his mind wandered somewhere else entirely. He rubbed his temples, sighing, as the weight of decisions settled on his shoulders, and without warning, his thoughts slipped backward. A cramped one-bedroom apartment, bills stacked on the counter like walls closing in, his phone lighting up with another declined payment notice. He remembered pacing the floor, hands in his hair, feeling the crushing shame of failure. His own parents had nothing to offer but disappointment. No one else believed in his dream. No one except her, Nora. She sat across from him at that tiny coffee shop, sliding the check across the table without a second thought. Build something your kids will be proud of, she had said. But remember where your roots are. Back then, he promised himself two things. He'd never be that powerless again. He'd build a life on his own terms, no matter what. But somewhere along the way, that second promise had twisted into something colder. Now, as the kitchen hummed softly around him, he wondered if cutting Nora out was truly independence, or just fear wearing confidence like armour. He didn't hate her, but depending on her made him feel small again, and he'd spent his whole life running from that feeling. He closed his laptop, the business plan finalised without her input. Tomorrow, they'd move forward, with or without her blessing. But as he turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, a part of him knew. Success built on silence feels a lot like failure. He just didn't know what to do about it yet. The next morning, I sat at my desk, sunlight creeping across the worn edges of the folder that held our family's quietest truths. For years, I thought giving them this gift would earn me a seat at their table. But now, I realised, I never needed their table. I had built my own. I traced the signatures on the investment forms, the ones they forgot, the ones they never thanked me for. And for the first time, the ache in my chest didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom waiting to be claimed. I opened the drawer and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. No anger, no accusations, just clarity. I drafted the first steps to restructure the trust, freeze the accounts, pause the monthly payments, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I wasn't cutting them off. I was giving them a chance to walk without a safety net. Maybe they'd fall, maybe they'd learn, or maybe they wouldn't notice at all. Either way, I was done waiting to be seen. I placed the draft next to the folder and took a slow breath. This wasn't the end of our family. It was just the end of me sacrificing my peace for their comfort. Downstairs, their laughter drifted upward, light and easy. I smiled faintly. Let them laugh. Let them build their world the way they see fit. But from now on, I would build mine too. I stood, gathering my coat, and stepped outside, letting the cool breeze greet me like an old friend. The world was bigger than this house, and maybe, just maybe, there was still life waiting for me beyond these walls. I drove downtown that afternoon, the quiet hum of the tyres steadying my thoughts. It had been months since I last visited Mr. Halpin's office. He'd handled our family's paperwork for years, steady, fair, and kind enough to offer tea without asking why you really came. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Nora," he smiled warmly. "Didn't expect to see you this week. Everything all right?" I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "Not exactly, but it's not falling apart either." He tilted his head, waiting, the way only patient people do. I placed the draft I'd written on his desk. A simple document. A complicated decision. I want to pause the monthly funding, just until I figure out what comes next. He scanned the paper, then looked back at me, his expression unreadable, but gentle. "You've been carrying this family on your shoulders a long time, Nora." I gave a faint smile, tired but honest. "Maybe too long." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Stopping the payments won't hurt your daughter, but it might force your son-in-law to finally learn what it means to stand on his own." I nodded, feeling the truth settle deep and steady in my chest. "I don't want to punish them, Halpern. I don't want to disappear inside their lives anymore." He offered a quiet laugh. "You're not disappearing. You're stepping out of the shadows you built for them." The words sat between us, warm and still. "Do you want to notify them officially?" he asked. I shook my head. Number let them feel the difference before they read about it. Halpern nodded, understanding more than I had words for. "I'll draft the hold and set it to activate by the end of the week. You can reverse it any time." I stood, gathering my coat. Maybe, but for now, I think I'll just enjoy the quiet. As I walked out, the weight in my shoulders lifted just enough to make room for something new. Freedom didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. When I got home, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not empty. I walked up to my study and placed my bag on the chair beside the desk. The folder waited where I'd left it, steady, familiar, heavy with unsaid things. I pulled it out, opened it one last time and ran my fingers over the signatures that had once felt like promises. Not contracts, promises. I thought of my husband, how he used to say, "Money is only a tool, but trust, that's the foundation." And I wondered when we stopped living by those words. I gathered the funding documents, the trust restructuring draft, and the old letter I had written to my daughter the day she got married. A letter she never read. A letter I never gave. I placed them all in the folder, aligning the edges carefully, like setting a table no one would sit at. Then I carried it downstairs. Instead of hiding it away, I left it on the console table in the entryway, the place where lost things waited to be found. I didn't tape a note to it, didn't lock it up. I just left it there. If they cared enough to notice, they'd find it. If they didn't, well, that told its own story too. I stood there a moment longer, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a bystander in my own home. I felt like someone finally choosing where she stood. I turned and walked outside, leaving the door open behind me, not as an invitation, but as a reminder. This house didn't run because of their laughter. It ran because someone made sure the lights stayed on, and today, that someone chose to step outside. The next morning, as the house buzzed with the usual noise of breakfast and school bags, he slipped away to his home office. He logged into the business account like he always did, expecting the quiet reassurance of the monthly deposit, but the numbers stared back at him. Still, unchanged, he refreshed the page once, then again. Nothing. A knot tightened in his stomach. Maybe it was a bank delay, maybe a technical glitch, but deep down, he knew. He scrolled to the transaction history, months of quiet funding, always arriving like clockwork. Until now. He sat back in his chair, the hum of the computer filling the silence he didn't want to face. She had paused it, without warning, without conversation. For the first time in years, the floor beneath his carefully built success felt thin. "I don't need her help anymore," he whispered aloud. But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. The business was stable, yes, but not indestructible. And part of him hated how much he still depended on money he hadn't earned alone. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing toward the door. Should he tell his wife? Should he ask Nora why? Neither answer felt right. Both tasted like failure. So instead, he shut the laptop and stood, adjusting his collar like armor. He would fix this. He had to. But as he walked out of the room, the silence of that missing deposit followed him like a shadow. And for the first time, the house didn't feel quite as safe. The next morning, I woke to a house filled with the usual sounds: coffee brewing, keys jingling, the rush of lives moving forward. But this time, I didn't rush with them. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching as they laughed over toast and morning plans, unaware that the foundation beneath them had quietly shifted. They hadn't noticed yet, but they would. And when they did, I wouldn't be waiting with open arms and a checkbook to fix it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, steady and slow, and took it to the porch. The autumn air was cool against my face, the quiet hum of the neighbourhood waking up around me. For the first time in months, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, but shared, between the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. I thought about calling them into a conversation, thought about explaining why I did what I did. But some lessons speak louder without words. I sipped my coffee and let the silence hold me. This wasn't revenge. This was reclaiming the quiet corners of my life that I had given away without asking for anything in return. I loved them. That hadn't changed. But love without boundaries becomes sacrifice, and I was done sacrificing my peace for their convenience. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the porch railing, and I smiled, soft, small, but real. Whatever storm came next, I would face it standing tall, not hiding behind silent support, not anymore. 2 days later, the numbers still hadn't changed. He stared at the business account as if glaring would force the deposits back into existence. Nothing, no funds, no explanations. He paced the office, his pulse pounding louder than the clicking of the mouse. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Investors, partners, banks, none of them close enough to call at this hour, and none of them with the kind of quiet loyalty Nora had shown. His wife's voice called from downstairs. "Everything okay, babe?" He forced calm into his voice. "Yeah, just sorting out some numbers." But the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the silence from Nora. He sat down hard, running a hand over his face. She'd pulled the rug out from under him without a single warning shot, and part of him hated her for it. But another part, smaller, quieter, wondered if he'd left her any other choice. He opened his email and began drafting a pitch to new investors. Short deadline, high risk, big promises. If he could lock in new funding fast enough, they'd never have to know how close he'd come to losing it all. But the clock was ticking. Payroll was due next week. Vendors were waiting. And for the first time since he built this company, the weight of it all felt heavier than he could carry alone. He clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath the fear. "I don't need her," he told himself again. But this time, the words barely convinced even him. He hit send on the emails and leaned back, staring at the ceiling like it held answers he couldn't find. Downstairs, his wife laughed with the kids, the sound light and far away. And for the first time, he wondered how long that laughter would last. if the walls of this life started to crack. That afternoon, I sat on the porch swing, a soft breeze weaving through the leaves. Liam climbed up beside me, his legs too short to reach the floor, but swinging anyway. We sat there in quiet company, watching the clouds drift by. He leaned his head against my arm and asked, "Grandma, why do old people smell like dust?" The words hit like a quiet thunderclap, innocent, unfiltered, echoes of his father's voice, softened through a child's curiosity. I took a slow breath, steadying the ache that rose in my chest. "Did Daddy say that?" I asked gently. Liam shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe on TV, I don't know." And just like that, the sting faded. He wasn't cruel, he was just repeating what the world told him. I smiled softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Well, dust smells like stories waiting to be told, and old people. We carry a lot of stories." He thought about that for a moment, his little brow furrowed. "Like bedtime stories." "Better," I whispered. "Life stories." He grinned, satisfied with that answer. And in that moment, I realised something simple and quiet. Legacy isn't what they say about you when you leave the room. It's what stays with them when you're gone. I pressed a kiss to his hair and let the breeze carry the moment away. Some people will never see the hands that held them up, but that doesn't make the holding any less real. We sat there until the sky turned gold, our shadows stretching long across the porch. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I felt enough. I found him standing by the kitchen island that evening, his face tight with questions he didn't know how to ask. "Mum, do you have a minute?" he said, softer than usual. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and nodded, following him out to the back porch where the autumn air felt lighter than the walls inside. For a moment, we stood there in the quiet. Then he spoke. "Why'd you pause the funding?" No preamble, no small talk, straight to the place it hurt. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "Because I needed to." He frowned, clearly expecting more. "Did something happen? Did I do something wrong?" The question sat between us like a fragile cup he didn't know how to hold. I looked at him. The boy who once ran to me when his science project broke, now a man too proud to admit he'd broken something bigger. "No one did anything wrong," I said gently. "But that doesn't mean everything's right." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Mum, we have employees, deadlines. I wish you'd told me first." I smiled faintly. "How often have you told me your plans before making them?" The words weren't sharp, but they found their mark. He looked away, guilt flickering across his face. I thought you trusted me to handle it." "I do," I said quietly. "That's why I stopped carrying it for you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Leaves rustled in the wind. A dog barked in the distance. The world kept moving, whether we caught up or not. Finally, he asked, barely above a whisper, Is this forever?" I shook my head, offering him one small mercy. "Number, but it's for now." He nodded, not in agreement, but in reluctant understanding. As he turned to go back inside, I called softly, "Michael?" He paused. "You're a good man. You always have been. Don't let fear make you forget that." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away angry, just quiet. Like me, that evening, after the house had quieted and the kids were tucked into bed, Emily stood alone in the kitchen. She wiped down the counters, the simple motion steadying her restless thoughts. Michael hadn't said much after his conversation with his mother, but the tension in his shoulders told her everything. She glanced toward the porch where Nora sometimes sat in the evenings, though lately the chair had remained empty. And for the first time in too long, Emily wondered how much space she'd allowed to grow between them, and how much of it was her doing. She opened the fridge and spotted the last slice of Nora's lemon cake. Forgotten, much like its maker. She hesitated, then quietly placed the slice on a small plate, setting it carefully beside a clean fork. No note, no apology, just a gesture, small but hers. She walked to the porch and placed the plate on the side table, where the lamp's soft glow caught its edges. Then she stepped back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Not an invitation, but not a barrier either. She didn't wait to see if Nora found it. Didn't need the moment to be witnessed to make it real. Back in the kitchen, Emily poured herself a cup of tea and sat at the table, quiet, in a way that finally felt honest. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel divided. It just felt human. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she had taken one step, and sometimes that was enough. The morning light crept across the porch as I stepped outside, cup of coffee in hand, ready for another quiet start. But something stopped me. There on the side table beside the swing sat a small plate, a single slice of lemon cake, carefully placed. Beside it, a clean fork. No note, no explanation. But I knew who left it. A soft smile found its way to my lips before I could stop it. I sat down, the porch swing creaking softly beneath me, and took a slow breath. For the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the help. I felt seen, not fully understood, not completely forgiven, but acknowledged. And sometimes that was enough. I picked up the fork and took a small bite. Sweet, familiar, and quietly perfect. I watched the neighbourhood wake up, the distant hum of a lawnmower, birds greeting the morning, life continuing in its messy, imperfect way. I rested the plate on my lap and wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug. I wasn't waiting for them to come outside, wasn't hoping for an apology or an explanation. I was simply here, alive, whole, and finally still. The house behind me would figure itself out. The business would rise or fall. The family would grow and stumble and heal in their own time. But today, in this moment, I had peace. And that was more than enough. I looked out at the sky, the soft blue stretching endlessly forward, and smiled. Legacy wasn't what you left behind. It was what you lived, quietly and fully, before you let go. The house woke slowly that morning. Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his emails with a heaviness he couldn't shake. No new investors yet. No miracle deposits, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Emily brewed coffee, her movements softer than usual. She caught his eye for a moment and gave a small smile, uncertain but real. He returned it, tired but grateful. They didn't speak about the business, not yet. Instead, they moved through the morning routine with a quiet that felt less like distance and more like space. Liam came down the stairs, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Grandma on the porch again?" he asked, his voice small. Emily glanced toward the window, where Nora sat quietly, coffee cup in hand, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. "Looks like it," she said softly. Michael followed her gaze, something shifting in his chest. He used to think her quiet was weakness. Now he wasn't so sure. Without a word, he poured a second cup of coffee and placed it on the counter. Emily watched him, saying nothing, but her smile grew a little steadier. They packed lunches, tied shoes, and kissed foreheads goodbye. Simple things, normal things, but today they felt earned. The weight of the missing funding still lingered, but the fear didn't feel quite as sharp, maybe because deep down they knew they couldn't build a life on someone else's shoulders forever. And outside, on the porch, Nora sipped her coffee and listened to the world wake up. She didn't need their thanks this morning. She had her peace. And for now, that was enough. Later that afternoon, I sat on the porch swing, watching the leaves scatter across the yard. The quiet wasn't heavy today. It was gentle, like an old friend. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill the space where bitterness used to live. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps on the porch steps. Liam. He carried his favourite storybook, the corners bent from too many nights of reading. Without a word, he climbed onto the swing beside me, legs swinging just short of the floor. He opened the book, but didn't read. Instead, he sat quietly, looking out over the yard, just like I did. And then, without realising, he sighed, a long, slow breath that matched mine exactly. I smiled, small and quiet. He didn't know he was echoing me, but there it was. Proof that some legacies don't need to be spoken to be passed on. He glanced up, catching my smile, and smiled back, easy and wide. "Nice out here," he said. "It is," I whispered. And we sat like that for a while. No lessons, no stories, just stillness shared between two hearts beating at the same quiet rhythm. I realised in that moment that I didn't need their gratitude. My love had already left fingerprints in the places that mattered most, and that was enough. The wind shifted softly, rustling the leaves like pages of a story still being written. Maybe they wouldn't remember everything I gave, but maybe they would remember how it felt to be loved without condition. I placed my hand gently on Liam's and gave his fingers a quiet squeeze. He leaned into my side, content, and in that simple, wordless moment, I found peace I hadn't known I was missing. That evening, as the sky turned soft and golden, I opened the drawer in my study. There, beneath years of forgotten paperwork and faded photographs, rested the compass, the one my husband gave me when we first bought this house, the one I used to carry on long walks when I felt lost and needed to find my way home. It had no great value, no shining gold, but it pointed north, and sometimes that was enough. I brushed the dust from its edges and smiled quietly. This wasn't a gift of wealth, it was a gift of direction. I found Liam still on the porch swing, his legs tucked beneath him, humming softly to himself. I sat beside him, the compass cradled in my palm. Without a grand speech or a lesson, I placed it gently in his small hands. He looked at it, wide-eyed and curious. "What's this?" he whispered. "Something to help you find your way when the road feels foggy," I said softly. He turned it over, the needle spinning before settling north. "Does it really work?" I smiled. "Only if you trust it." He nodded, serious in the way only children can be, and tucked the compass into his pocket like a secret treasure. No promises, no conditions, just a quiet transfer of something meant to be carried forward. We sat there as the sky faded into twilight, the porch lights flickering on one by one. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, my story rested safely in his pocket, spinning quietly toward a future I might never see, but had helped shape all the same. The next morning, the house stirred without me. I heard the distant clatter of breakfast plates, the hum of conversation, the front door opening and closing as the day began without fanfare. And for once, I didn't rush to meet it. I sat on the porch swing, a fresh cup of coffee warming my hands, the autumn breeze gentle on my face. The compass sat quietly on the table beside me. I hadn't asked Liam to give it back. Some things aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be carried forward. I took a slow breath and closed my eyes, letting the stillness fill the corners of my soul. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for recognition, wasn't hoping for a thank you. I was simply still. And in that stillness, I found peace. They would stumble, they would fall, they would rise again, with or without me. And that was the gift I had given them all along, freedom, Not the kind you wrap in money or build in houses, but the kind you earn when someone loves you enough to step back and let you try. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. I am not their foundation anymore, but I will always be their home. I smiled softly, letting the words rest where they belonged. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the quiet question I had long stopped asking. What do you hold on to when your hands are finally empty? And for the first time, I knew the answer. You hold on to peace, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough.